Hello, everyone, and welcome to the VBMA Podcast. If you're a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back. We are glad to have you with us again. And if you're tuning in for the first time, we're excited you're here and hope you find something valuable in today's episode. This podcast is made possible thanks to the generous support of our national sponsors, the AVMA, Men's and Associates, and Merck Animal Health. We're incredibly grateful for their continued partnership in helping us bring business education and leadership conversations to veterinary students across the country. Let's jump into today's episode.
To another VBMA podcast. Today, I am graced with the presence of Dr. Hope. She is a 2024 graduate of the Texas A&M University School of Veterinary Medicine. And Hope, it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Yes, glad to be here. I listen all the time.
Aw. Okay. Well, let's start off by getting a little bit of your backstory. I know that you tracked mixed animal, and I know that you still work with a lot of mixed animals. So, can you tell us a little bit about your backstory and where you are today?
Yeah, so in vet school, I went to A&M, of course, and so I was kind of tracking mixed animal throughout school. And then my fourth year, I actually did an alternative track in business, which just meant that I had more externships to leave the hospital, which was great. And I did a lot of kind of creative externships, right? So I worked with like the state board or just different things just to get that experience. Since practice ownership and management is really important to me in my future. And my first year after graduation, just over a year, I was at a small animal predominant practice and kind of creatively added some large animal experience through some neighboring practices. So you can definitely do externships kind of after being a real vet, I learned. And then I've stayed in touch with different industry projects. I'm always working with a big one right now is VetCetera, and so I have a lot of content through them. And then right now I'm actually between full-time positions. That's been an interesting situation, but right now I'm doing mainly relief, which is very eye-opening to do, and something you can still do as a recent graduate. You just have to be definitely mindful of all the challenges that it brings.
Okay, awesome. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you creatively brought in the mixed animal aspect your first year out?
Yeah, that was definitely interesting to me. So the practice that I guess my job I was paid for, right? Used to be a dairy practice, and over the years it had transitioned to mostly small animal. And they built a new facility that did not have the large animal part of the facility anymore, right? And so I was really wanting to still have that mixed animal aspect, even if I was focusing on my small animal skills, which is something that it sounds like most of us fall back on later in life, right? And so I made it not quite 2 months sitting inside a building in the summer where it was beautiful weather outside, just working on dogs and cats and snakes and whatever else came in, that I started networking through my local VMA actually. And so there were practices and doctors there that they had mixed animal practices, right? And it was an hour away, so it was outside my non-compete. And so I just called them up and I said, "Hey, I'm a real vet, but I want to come hang out on my days off." And they thought that was so weird, but they were happy to have me out there. And so I went to that practice for almost an entire year, actually, just a day or two here or there. And it was kind of a weird thing because clients got really confused because they're like, "Oh, you're a real vet?" And I'm like, "Yes." But I was just there to gain experience. And of course, depending on the situation, sometimes I was doing the calf pull or whatever if they didn't have a doctor. But then sometimes I was just there observing. And I think you can still learn so much after school from other doctors. And that's something I missed having when I had to be the doctor. I couldn't be there watching others as much.
Yeah, I think that's a really awesome thing that you were able to navigate, and I think that definitely really helps, you know, being able to expand your knowledge base, So I think
Yeah.
that just watching you do that, and we'll definitely shout out your Instagram at the end, but I've been,
Yes.
watching you through your Instagram and seeing all of your different experiences is very, very cool. And I think that it's something unique that a lot of people are not doing, but can definitely learn from. So, oh, let's get into some of my big questions. So, what were some of the biggest factors you were considering when evaluating your first job offer after school, like out of
Yes.
school?
So like my first job, so I think I had a few things on my list. Of course, I had like a master spreadsheet and all the things, but life happens, right, in fourth year. And so if you had asked me, at this point where y'all are at right now in clinical year, where I was going, I could tell you where I was going. I knew everything about it, right? I helped them write that contract, that clinic. And so a lot of things changed for me. And so I had to pivot kind of what I was set on and what was most important to me. And when I was making that transition right around Christmas time in clinical year, what was on my list was I really was focused on the culture of the practice, and maybe not a practice that knew what the word culture was and could push it, because, it's a feeling. You have to walk in the doors and you just get the vibes, I guess, of the practice. So culture was super important to me. I'd worked in toxic teams before and I did not want to do that again. The support team was super important to me, not just, how many there were to like support me if they were more experienced techs, since they knew more than I did at some periods, but also how well they were compensated by the practice, how they were treated. Were they treated as an important member of the team and not someone just to hold the dog, right? And so that was really important to me. Mentorship, of course, everyone says that. I think that I had an idea in my mind, and what it turned out to be was different, but I think you just have to have what you think you'll need, right, before you get into it. So that was really important to me, having someone who had been out a while, who was like confident in their medicine so they could help teach me and guide me. And then also the clinic's involvement in the community was super important to me. So I wanted a practice that wasn't just focused on themselves and the numbers and stuff like that, but that they were active in their community, giving back, having students come over, teaching the kindergarten class, stuff like that was really important to me.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really important topics, but things that are kind of unusual in the sense of how did you go about asking these questions early on? Like, how did you find out about technician and support staff compensation and community involvement in those kinds of things?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it you can learn from the clinic social media, which not every clinic has to have a beautiful social media page to be considered. I know a lot of people worry about that, but I really just, once I was there, there's so much you can gain by being a fly on the wall. There's so many questions I asked, before I got there and visited. I only had, we don't get very many days off clinical year. So I visited that practice for 2 days in January and 2 days on, well, what was my spring break, and that schedule's changed. So I really only had like those 2 days. And so during that time, I made sure it was a working interview. So I wasn't just standing around watching, right? And so I made sure that during, well, I think my first morning I watched, but after that, I made sure I worked with every single technician who I would be running rooms with. I obviously didn't like get to do surgery, but I made sure I ran rooms with them so I could get a feel for like their knowledge base, how they worked with clients. I was able to like watch the front desk, listen to how they answer the phone, listen to how they schedule. I asked my boss, who would have been my boss at the time, I asked her a ton of questions. I even like typed some up that we didn't get to. And so she would like respond back to them. We went to dinner, of course. And so I just asked a ton of questions. I don't want to list them all, but I really just kept asking and listened to that response and how it's presented, right? Even in a clinic when it's stressful and we're busy, how they act. And that really led to seeing the culture as well.
That's such a good point. And I think that something that my conversations with you in the past had, like things that I'm really picking up from that is the importance of being in the hospital when you're actually looking to sign contracts and looking for a job. Having that experience while being there, spending more than just half a day there is important to truly understand the culture and the vibe of the hospital and the way that people are treated or the way that they interact with clients and things like that. I think the flow is something you cannot pick up on based off of half a day of.
Exactly.
So, can you walk us through your contract negotiation process? Like, were there any surprises or lessons that you learned and some red flags that you think students should be aware of?
Yeah. So for me, since I was starting, with that practice, I went through and I made sure I got multiple offers, right? And so at that point, I was really truly considering, don't get offers from places you're not truly considering, right? But I made sure I had at least three or four that I was going through. I had all the way from ones that were more of a handshake situation, right? Which I've been burned that way too. And it's worked out well for me in some of the situations too. And then I had some, very corporate contracts, right? And so they're very, very different to look at. For me, when I was negotiating with the practice I ended up going to, it was a lot of back and forth. And so it was a lot of, can you clarify this for me? I would like this added. I like this taken off. It was a lot of back and forth. It was painstaking. I definitely feel that my boss was very frustrated in the situation. She's like, let's just sign it and go. And I was like, no, don't let anyone let you feel pressured, right? Into making that decision, whether it's the timing, don't let them make you feel pressured to sign it at the end of the externship or, at the end of the year or like you have the power, right? We know that we have so many job openings and so few veterinarians graduating. So you're in the driver's seat. I made sure that I knew what pieces were super important to me and then what pieces were I learned through the process super important to my boss, right? And so there were some things that I left in the contract, which may have later become an issue, right? But I left certain things to make sure certain things were in. You're not going to get 100% of what you want, right? It's a negotiation, but it's going back and forth, being professional throughout that and making sure to document like what you want changed and making sure that change happens. The biggest thing I would emphasize is to get it reviewed because I'm not a lawyer. None of us are lawyers. We go to vet school because we want to be veterinarians, not because we want to be lawyers, right? And so even the schools that I feel like A&M had a few different lectures which were helpful in the main curriculum as far as contracts, right? But not every school has that. And even if you go to those lectures, usually there's another test you're studying for and you're worried about. And so being in the middle of contract negotiation is very different than when you probably had those lectures. And so make sure to get it reviewed by someone. It is worth every penny. I wrote multiple checks to leave my first practice. And so make sure you get it reviewed so you know what you're expecting in case something doesn't work out. The biggest red flags I would say to watch out for is kind of like I alluded to, is watching for those, I call them clawback periods. So it's not just for a bonus. So if you get a big signing bonus, like a $20,000 signing bonus, right? Usually that's tied to a period of time. They're not going to give that to you and say you can walk away in a month with that 20 grand, right? And so usually there's a period on those, but there's also periods on other things that I never realized. So I had to pay back for the last 6 months of CE that I went to when I left my practice, even though I finished the contract. I had to pay back for, the last 6 months of that license for that year or, all those different things. So there's clawback periods not just tied to bonuses, which is, I think, something that I don't believe I even heard in like the VBMA lectures I went to. I would also watch for the red flag of negative accrual, which that is phrased in a lot of different ways these days, in a lot of creative ways, and recruiters and a lot of people will try to tell you that's not what it is and it is what it is. I walked away from a corporate practice because of negative accrual, not because of the practice itself. I love the practice. I love the doctor there. She didn't understand, why I was walking away, but we hit a brick wall with that. And I said I would walk away, and I did. And they found a great doctor, and so I'm glad for them. But that is really important to me. You need to be able to be a doctor and think like a doctor and work through those cases slowly if you need to, and not be worried about the money all the time. You have to keep it in mind, but not worried if you're going to owe money back. That's just insane to me. And then the last red flag I'll say is non-competes. I'm not completely against non-competes, right? So when I own a practice in the future, I would like to have the idea that one of my doctors couldn't set up shop next door to me, right? And take clients and affect the business. So I understand both sides of it, but I was also in a situation when I left my last practice that I've had to move. I was, I'd have to drive at least an hour to get to another practice I could work at. And so for me, I was, I'm single at the time, so that was easier for me to do. But for some people, that's really hard. So making sure if you do sign one with a non-compete, know where your options are, know the length, and have a plan in place. So those are the biggest red flags, I would say.
Those are not things that people wouldn't typically say. I think you brought up some really important topics that, I wasn't familiar with, having to pay back CE. I thought you had your CE allowance per year and you got to spend that the way you do. Thanks for bringing those up. I will definitely get a contract lawyer to look at things, but I'm gonna be even more aware, before I ship it off to them to have a look at it.
Exactly.
Hey, so are there any business or communication skills that you're glad you focused on during vet school? I know that you were heavily involved in the VBMA and you had a lot of business projects under that you took under your wing. So can you tell us a little bit more about your big takeaways?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing that I took away was just communication with clients because it doesn't matter if you were the valedictorian, right? If your class, if you cannot communicate to the client what you're doing and why you're doing it, like that dog is not paying the bill. You have to be able to, at some level, like there's a lot of sales in this field. I don't like to say it like that, but that's so true, right? And I'm not trying to upsell clients. I'm not trying to make them spend as much money as possible. I'm speaking for myself. Like I don't do that. But if your dog comes in for its rabies shot and it really needs other vaccines, heartworm testing, prevention, right? I have to be able to educate that client mindfully, right? Reading the room and the situation and things like that and documenting. But you have to be able to communicate with clients, not just clients, also your team, all the things, but being able to teach clients and educate clients. And so I forget who, I don't know, his famous quote by someone who said something to the effect of, like, you don't understand a topic well enough unless you can explain it to a 5 year old. And so, not that our clients are 5 years old, but that's something I've kind of lived by throughout my schooling experience. And so, being able to understand something at the basic level, they don't need to know every L1, L2, every stage of heartworms. They need to know heartworms can really affect your dog, that they're spread by mosquitoes, and we should really do something about it today. And if not, okay, let's revisit that next month or something like that, put a time period on it. And so the communication aspect, I feel like it's been said so many times, but it's so important. So much of my time as a new grad was figuring out what my like spiels are, I guess, on like basic things, right? And when you're explaining heartworms to a client for the first time, you're like tripping over yourself trying to explain a topic that you understand really well, right? And so it's just figuring out how to communicate those basic things and then translating that into, right, the more complicated things of like working up medicine cases and stuff like that. I would say that if I looked at anything that I wish I had learned, and like you said, I was very heavily involved in VBMA. I'm so sad that I don't have that anymore, right? And so, I went to as many lectures as I could, all the things. We had a variety of topics at A&M. I feel like were really good, but something that I didn't get through the main curriculum or through VBMA was learning more about hospital flow and team management. Because even if you aren't the manager of the practice or the owner of the practice, you still have to manage the flow of your day, right? And so if you have somebody who shows up 20 minutes late, someone who shows up half an hour early, and a nail trim, and you and your one technician or however have to do all those things, you have to manage that flow, which that sounds really intimidating, and it is, because you're trying to like be a doctor and look up how to treat the 3 dogs in front of you. But I wish I learned more about managing that flow in a way that it makes everybody's day go smoother. You get to the clients, you have time to spend with the clients, and you don't feel as rushed. But we all know that the schedule's very unpredictable, right? And so you have to be able to manage the flow in front of you and also managing the team. And so some of that is with time, but I wish I'd learned more about managing, like, well, okay, there's a technician and assistant, like, can they go do the nail trim while you spend 10 minutes looking up this case and then go see your next patient? Or things like that, which I'm not sure how it could have been taught better. I just wish that I had had that. So maybe that's something for vet students right now to focus on in their externships or pay more attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring up such a good point that actually rolls me right into my next question, which is about efficiency. I know
Mhm.
that it's something that it's pretty daunting for a lot of us that are graduating soon. Or, even in vet school, when you're on primary care, some of your appointments take 45 minutes to get the history in the background, and you haven't even
Mhm.
really put hands on the patient. And it's just, how do you manage that? And I know that, all of that comes with experience, but how did you go about it? And what advice do you have there?
Yeah, so that's a lot. That's a big question. I think the biggest thing is paying attention to scheduling and your caseload. And so I know that I've shared a lot on social media about my numbers and things like that, not to brag about what I'm doing, but just because I didn't know what was expected. Like, well, how many patients does the average new grad see a day? I don't know. Like, nobody knows. Nobody knows how long should we have to do a wellness appointment, which they're never just wellness appointments. Spoiler alert. But like, or how long to work up a sick case, which it might be a dog that coughed because of kennel cough, or could be coughing because it needs a huge workup. And so the way I approached it is, I said with my practice, we were doing 30-minute appointments for everything. And so once my schedule started happening, though, my boss was getting scheduled more of the wellness stuff because it was her clients, right? And they wanted to see her and continuity of care. And I was getting scheduled every new client or all the same day sick appointments, which got really overwhelming very quickly because I was doing sick appointments in 30 minutes, which sometimes that worked out if it was something, broken toenail, or okay, I can do that, or allergies, or I mean, allergies not as simple as I just made it sound, but or it's a huge workup and it's been sick for 4 days and now you've got to work it up on a Friday afternoon. And so pretty early on, I was like, this is not manageable. I was running behind. I wasn't, I didn't have the time to look things up, and I needed that. And so we expanded my sick appointments to 45 minutes. And we tried to not book sick appointments back to back, which that definitely did not work. But we tried. And so it was communicating with the receptionist, right, or the CSRs, how they were scheduling. They were trying to schedule me some vaccine appointments, and it just works out the way it does, right? And so, um, just adjusting that as you need it and not being afraid to ask for it. That didn't stay very long, right? Because eventually they got shortened, and I kind of just got more in the swing of things. But for your first appointments, you're not just going in there and giving vaccines. Like you got to learn where everything lives. Where's the vaccine in the fridge? How does the hospital protocols work on all these things? And so it's managing that caseload, especially at the very beginning, especially if you're going into a practice where, some do where the first week you just shadow a doctor, and, some do that. And I think that's great. I really wanted to be hands on at the beginning, but it's a learning curve jumping right in there. Even if you did a lot of externships in school, even if you feel pretty confident going out, but it's really hard. It's really hard to manage and just know that when you get out, you're not the only one, right? Everyone has struggled through that and everyone works at a different pace. Some people may want an hour for a wellness appointment. And for example, it kind of depends on your practice. If your practice is set up for 15-minute appointments and you're asking for an hour, that's a little unreasonable potentially to your practice manager or owner. But I think it's just working with what you're used to, and once you get into it, don't be afraid to adjust and for ask for something different.
The way things are done, taking a step back and be like, actually, it would be a lot better for me having everybody on the same page that I do need a 45-minute appointment for a sick appointment, especially if I've seen them back to back, right? Like that, having those conversations isn't easy, but I think
Mm-mm.
that, yeah, it's definitely
It's not
it,
easy.
having the courage to do that can only make it better, right? Or
Mhm,
the answer is no, and that's the answer, right? But you've at least tried.
mhm.
And I think working at a place that tells you no when you're asking for something like that, it's definitely challenging itself.
Yeah. And that's something I did speak with my like future boss about when we were negotiating and everything was like, well, about how long do you think? And she kept asking me for numbers of exactly what I needed. Well, I didn't know because until you're in there doing it, you're like, oh yeah, 30 minutes is like plenty of time. A whole half an hour to, take some x-rays, and that's plenty of time until you're in there doing them back to back sick, same day sick appointments. And then you realize, or new clients that are really second or third opinions and not just new clients. That's extra fun. And so until you get there, you don't know. So I did ask for certain times and was given that, but then I needed longer times for certain appointments, and they were willing to adjust that with me, even though it was kind of hard on the team to be like, okay, which doctor, what time, they were very gracious with me and working through that, especially in the beginning.
I know you've been pretty candid on your social medias about having some just like periods of exhaustion in the veterinary field. I
Mhm.
know that that's something a lot of new grads face, especially, you're running the high of being fresh out of school and you're excited and slowly you get slammed and slammed and slammed and you just kind of hit a wall. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've navigated pushing that wall? And
Yeah, so I think that I would say that I mean I went all through vet school, right? And there's big push for wellness and burnout, and you hear all these things, and you're like, that's not going to be me. Like those, I don't know what I told myself, but things included like, oh, that's just some people, just don't work as hard, or I don't. It's just whatever I had in my own head, right? Not that any of those things are true, and so I wasn't worried about it. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I got through vet school and that's freaking hard, right? Like I got through clinical year, which is even more exhausting. Like I'll be fine. Like it's just a different kind of hard. It's fine. I'll push through. I had the mentality that I think my whole life that like if something's not going well or it's very difficult, you just like work harder. You just work harder and you do better. And that's the extent of my plan that I had. And so I feel that I was still mindful though about like eating right and sleeping well. And there's certain basic things that I don't negotiate on, or I tried not to in the beginning. And it is very stressful getting into a new practice. I don't believe that the first few months were as much of a problem for me. So I was like, oh, it's fine. I'm doing fine. I went home every day. There's certain things I set for myself. Like I have an app that watches my sleep that I pay for. And so that makes me pay attention to sleeping enough. I started that sometime during vet school. I think we had a lab on sleep. And then every day for lunch, I always went home and let my dogs out. And that was a non negotiable. I said it was because of my dogs, but it was more because of me. And so I lived 5 minutes from the clinic, so even if I was gone for 15 minutes, I left the building, went and let my dogs out, came home. I try not to spend like too much time outside the practice working on practice stuff. I try to do my notes like at the practice, stuff like that. But like burnout is real, right? And I wish that I hadn't been speaking from experience in saying that. And I didn't realize what it was for a long time. You can listen to all the lectures, you can listen to all the podcasts about it. And until you're in the middle of it, I think you had mentioned like exhaustion. Well, I kept like saying that in my posts and stuff because I was like, oh, I'm just exhausted. And because that's what I thought it was. I was like, I'm tired. I'm mentally exhausted. I'm emotionally exhausted. Sometimes you're ethically exhausted if you have so many cases in a row where you really have that friction between what you would like to do and what you can do for a variety of reasons. And so I had multiple periods where I was like almost to that point, almost to that point. I think it was in January that I completely burnt out and I was done. I did not want to be a veterinarian anymore. I did not want to get up and go to work. I can't really like believe that I'm saying this out loud, but it was so true. And I think I like got off social media altogether. Like I was just like done. And it's terrible to feel that way about a profession that I spent, like 20 years of school working towards and my whole life. But it's out there and it's real. And I think that until you experience it, not that I want anyone to experience it, but until you experience it for yourself, I don't think that you could take it quite as seriously. And so I heard all the talks in the podcast, just like I'm talking now. And I was like, oh, I'm fine. I'll be fine. I'll work harder, but you have to take care of yourself. And I think that that means different things for different people. And so when you're in school, you don't take as much time, to do your hobbies. You just don't have time. And so I would really encourage everyone to find what those things are that fill their cup and set those boundaries. So lunch every day, even if you go sit in your car for 10 minutes, you're not in the practice. You know what I mean? Like make sure you eat breakfast or get your sleep, whatever those things are for you, make sure you're taking that time and you're recognizing and checking in with yourself about where you are because you can't control necessarily what walks in the door or the times that you're by yourself in the practice because your boss is sick or those things are going to happen. But you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of your patients and to be there better for your patients. During that time that I didn't want to be a vet anymore, I feel that I wasn't serving my patients very well. My team said that like they didn't really notice very much different, but I did. I did not feel like I was serving my patients well because I wasn't there for them because I was very burnt out at that time.
Thanks, Hope, for being so open and honest with that. I knew I could ask you and get like a real response, so I appreciate you sharing with it. Just want to throw out there that I really utilized your social media to kind of, see what an example of a week or a month or a day in a veterinary hospital looked like. And I think that for any listeners out there that want a good, real representation, you should definitely check out your page. And I think you do a really great job keeping it up to date with the craziness of the veterinary world in your day to day. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. I try to show both sides. It's not just puppies and kittens, and that's what really frustrated me about the space is that a lot of vets who are out there a lot, they're just showing the positives, and that's so frustrating to me because that is not accurate and it is really hard and I wish that I could see that and I think some people are doing better about that for sure. But it's definitely hard sometimes even if you're trying to see the positives, right? And so normalizing that for sure.
Okay, well, my last question for you is I know that you mentioned practice ownership, and I know that that's been something that you've been interested in for a long time. Can you tell us that is that still your goal? Is that something that you're moving towards? How has how have your desires changed, if they have at all?
I think that I still want to own a practice. I still want to be involved in the management. And even through my first practice, I was involved, maybe even over involved in some of the management aspects of it. And so I think just I should have been a little more careful about how much I was doing while also trying to learn how to be a doctor at the same time. But a lot of those things, it's not just you're a doctor and then all of a sudden you buy a practice. Like there's a lot of steps in there that you can learn how to help manage the team, help manage inventory, be involved in those the smaller, I say little, inventory is a huge thing. But being involved in those smaller aspects of the practice to get that experience while you're still becoming a doctor and getting your feet under you and all of that. I still really want to own a practice. That's still super important to me. My last almost position that fell through recently. I was going through the books, putting together the P&L, showing them, where it was 0.3% profitable and the doctor wasn't paying herself. I mean, there's so many of these practices you have to take that knowledge, mainly what I gained through VBMA actually, and see where that practice is at. Is it a good place to potentially work to own it soon, right? And so I had a lot of that set up and God closed that door for me pretty quickly. And so it's still, on my plan to do that. But I've also realized that I don't have to rush into that either because doing relief right now, I get to see so many practices and how they work and the flow. And it's so eye opening to see how people do things differently. And I've been, working in vet clinics since I was in high school. It's like 10 years. And so getting to see all of that is still adding to that goal even if it's maybe not where I thought I would be right now. And so it's still on the horizon. I know it'll happen eventually, but I'm not setting numbers on it right now.
You're learning so much more by seeing so many different hospitals, like your takeaways from that will only benefit you, or you'll recognize that, like, I definitely don't want to do something like that. And so I think that there's not a right or wrong path. And I love that you can recognize that you are getting something out of it despite any changes in what you thought was the right path. Well, thank you so much for being here, Hope. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I know I can always utilize you for your expertise. And I think something that I really appreciate is that you bring a different experience, like you bring a different set of experiences to conversations. And I appreciate that you're always willing to share. So thanks for being here. And I hope you have a really good time in your new city. I know,
Thanks.
and I wish you the best.
Of course. Thanks for having me so much. I love this podcast. I'm glad that VBMA is like pushing more out there to students. And so, for anyone who's hearing this and has not been involved in VBMA, you should be. Definitely the best organization I was in during vet school. If I had to pick one thing to do all over again, I would do VBMA for sure. And I'll just throw in my Instagram is at hope.dvm24. And so I put a lot out there just about being a new grad or now, I guess, a recent grad. I'm not new anymore. And so if y'all have any questions, I have people reach out to me through that, and I'm happy to answer any questions about contracts and I mean all the things, right, that go into preparing to graduate and be a new grad yourself. So,
Thanks for sharing. All right. I hope. Have a good one.
bye.